U.S. President Joe Biden wants to overthrow the Israeli government for Hamas. U.S. President Joe Biden wants to build a port in Gaza for Hamas. I'll have information on both of these stories and some thoughts about the future of American Jewry as AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby, holds its annual conference this week in Washington, D.C. at a time which may prove to be the gravest crisis in U.S.-Israel relations in history. Coming up on In Focus. Over the weekend, New York Magazine published an interview with former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Itamar Rabinovich, where Rabinovich told the magazine that a senior U.S. official had approached him to ask him about the mechanics and the best means to overthrow the Israeli government. Pretty amazing. What we're seeing today is that the Biden administration has parted ways with Israel on the major goals of the war in Gaza. Israel set two, or actually three, very clear goals for the war in Gaza. First, eradicate Hamas as a military organization and as a regime in Gaza. Second, free all of the hostages and bring them home. And three, prevent Gaza from ever again becoming or serving as a threat to Israel's national security. The Biden administration initially supported, or at least paid lip service to all of these goals, but over the past several weeks, and really, I would argue, since the outset of the war, they have made statements and implemented policies regarding Israel that have undermined Israel's ability to achieve any of its three war goals. And over the past several weeks, the Biden administration has made clear that actually its war goals are very, very different from Israel's. Mainly what they want to do is use the Hamas October 7th massacre of Israelis as a stepping stone to building an independent Palestinian state in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and presumably in Jerusalem as well, that will be the personification or the final status of the hoped-for two-state solution. And it doesn't matter to the Biden administration that such a state, as we saw on October 7th, is an existential threat to the Jewish state. In other words, there is no two-state solution. You establish a Palestinian state and you end the Jewish state. They want to move forward with that. And to that end, they don't want Israel to defeat Hamas. They want Israel not to defeat Hamas. They want Israel to be defeated. And we're seeing this play out in a series of statements and actions by the Biden administration in recent days. And I just want to walk you through them. So the first thing that I want to go to is an interview that we woke up this morning to find out about that Biden gave on Sunday to MSNBC. And in the course of this interview with MSNBC, the very, progressive American cable network, Biden made a couple of very alarming statements about Israel. First thing that he said was that, and we're going to play them for you. The first cut that I want to show you is where Biden is talking about how Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy is hurting Israel. Israel's strategy that Netanyahu is leading in this war, which is to win. That's actually a strategy that's undercutting Israel, that's hurting the country. So let's just go to the videotape for that.
What's the come to Jesus part? What tough love are you going to give to the prime minister?
What's happening is he has a right to defend Israel, a right to continue to pursue Hamas, but he must pay more attention to the innocent lives being lost as a consequence of the actions taken. He's hurting, in my view, he's hurting Israel more than helping Israel by making the rest of the world, it's contrary to what Israel stands for.
The second statement that Biden made that I think is really important in this really remarkable interview with MSNBC is the one that he made about Israel's intention to take control over Rafah, the city that borders Egypt. So that's the last Hamas stronghold. There are assessed to be 4 Hamas battalions that are still hunkered down in Rafah. And it also is the town that controls Gaza's international border with Egypt. And, I've long argued that we should have done that first. We should have taken over Rafah first. But whatever the case may be, we're now at the end of the rope, and we need to take over Rafah now because that's how you get to an end game where Hamas is obliterated. And the Biden administration is standing on its hind legs saying, absolutely not over our dead bodies. So let's just hear what Biden says about this.
What is your red line with Prime Minister Netanyahu? Do you have a red line? For instance, would invasion of Rafah, which you have urged him not to do, would that be a red line?
It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical. So there's no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them. They don't have. But there's red lines that if he crosses, he cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead as a consequence of going after. There's other ways to deal with the trauma caused by Hamas. It's like look, the first time I went over, I sat with them and I sat with the war cabinet. I said, look, don't make the mistake America made. America made a mistake. We went after bin Laden until we got him. But we shouldn't have gone into Ukraine. I mean, we shouldn't have gone into the whole thing in Iraq and Afghanistan. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary. And it just caused more problems than it cured.
Notice, by the way, he said there that he would never abandon Israel and he would never stop giving us Iron Dome missiles so that we can defend ourselves. But again, Iron Dome missiles are all very nice and good, but when you have a growing enemy that's clearly genocidal, as we saw on October 7th, rebuilding its forces, it's not enough to be able to have the capacity to intercept incoming missiles and mortars and rockets. You actually need to take offensive action against them. But Iron Dome missiles are a defensive system, so it's nice that the United States is going to let us ward off incoming missiles. The question is more offensive weapons that the United States is now threatening to hold hostage to Israel, abiding by the Biden administration's demands that Israel stand down and not seize Rafah, that we not win the war, and certainly not that we expand our operations in the north against Iran's Lebanese proxy, Hezbollah, in order to allow the 60,000 internal refugees from the border communities in the north to return home. So Biden has been reportedly slow-walking things like tank shells, artillery shells, and Air Force ordnance are bombs from the air. We've had a lot of soldiers killed in operations in Gaza in recent weeks because they were laying mines, they were laying TNT in order to blow up buildings from the inside. And these were buildings that were already empty, and they should have been bombed from outside with artillery or with tank shells or from the air. But Israel is conserving our weapons because the United States is slow walking the weapon supplies of offensive weapons. But here's Biden saying, Rafah is a red line, but we're going to give you the means to intercept incoming missiles, which means that we're not going to allow you to defend yourselves by defeating your actual enemies, by actually defeating your enemies. So that was the clear point here, or two clear points. It's that they don't want Israel to proceed in Rafah. That's a red line. And at the same time, they're going to pretend that they're supporting us by continuing to give us defensive weapon systems. So those are two things there. And and then the third one, I just want to give you this clip, is what he says about he wants to come here again and he wants to speak before the Knesset so that he can convince the Knesset that, you know, he knows better than Israel's representatives do what's good for us. So let's just hear him talk about that as well.
Some have suggested you should go back to Israel and address the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Is that something you would do?
Yes.
Would that have to be at the invitation of the prime minister, or could that be at the invitation of the president?
I'd rather not discuss it more.
So here we have to see that it isn't only Biden saying this, not that it would matter because he's the president, so he says this, but listen to what Vice President Kamala Harris had to say about how the United States views the Israeli government on the one hand and the Israeli people on the other hand.
I think it's important for us to distinguish, or at least to not conflate, the Israeli government with the Israeli people. The Israeli people are entitled to security, as are the Palestinians, in equal measure. And our work is always, as the United States of America, going to be to do what we must and what we always have, to stand for the security of Israel and its people, and also to do what we have done behind closed doors and in public around forcing a better path forward in terms of what's happening currently in Gaza.
See, here what we have with Kamala is she's actually making a very clear a moral equivalence, drawing a moral equivalence between Hamas and the Israeli government, because the United States has, from the outside, wrongly said that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people when we see that 3/4 of the Palestinians support what Hamas did on October 7th and support Hamas. A very small percentage of Palestinians support the U.S.-funded and supported Palestinian Authority. But Hamas very much is the embodiment of the Palestinian national ethos, which is organized around the singular concept of annihilating the Jews and annihilating the Jewish state. So they very much are representative of the Palestinians. And the other side of the coin is that Israel is a democracy. You know, we choose our leaders. And whether we choose on the right or we choose on the left, the leaders are the embodiment of the will of the people. So when Kamala Harris says that she draws a distinction between the Israeli people and our government, then she's pretending away the fact that our government is the representative of the people, that the Knesset is the people's house, and that the government is a coalition of parties that comprise the majority of the representatives in the people's house, in the Knesset. The current government, the Netanyahu government, has a 64-seat majority without Benny Gantz's national whatever stateliness party or whatever he calls it, which has, I think, 8 members. And so, it's a very stable 64-seat majority and 120-seat Knesset, and yet here is Kamala Harris pretending that it's not representative of the will of the people, which of course it is. And it's not only the question of polling. How is Netanyahu polling? Some polls have him ahead, other polls have him behind. We've talked about this in past shows. But 3/4 of the Israelis, or upwards of 80% of Israelis, support an Israeli offensive operation to seize control of Rafah. 75% of Israelis oppose Palestinian statehood. Over 90% of Israelis oppose the survival of Hamas at the end of this war. So we're talking about even Israelis who say don't want Netanyahu to continue to serve as prime minister are completely 100% behind the goals that his government and he in particular have set out for this war. So that here's Biden saying that he wants to come to the people's house and tell us that our government is wrong when the government is the embodiment of the will of the overwhelming majority of Israelis. And here's Kamala Harris saying that we're wrong. And here I just want to make a point or whatever, tell a story. Today, I'm taping the show on Sunday, March 10th. And we buried today at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at Mount Herzl Military Cemetery, Major Avishar Ben David. Okay, he was 42 years old, a father of 5. And since October 7th, he has been mobilized in reserves where he had been the commander of the, what would you call it, the command, the command car, I guess, or the forward command of the he was the commander of the forward command post of the commando brigade. So this is all the special forces in the Israeli army are in the commando brigade, and he has been serving in reserve duty since October 7th, being in charge of sort of the operations center of the brigade commander. So he was in the front line of all the operations in Gaza. He's the father of 5. He's from the community of Eli in the Benjamin district. And last week we had another attack against Eli at the gas station just at the entrance to the community, where a Palestinian Authority police officer or security services officer opened fire with his U.S.-provided M16 rifle at civilians. He killed 2. He killed a 16-year-old boy, and he killed a middle-aged rabbi. And he, in turn, was killed by an off-duty reservist who owned a hummus stand at the gas station who was just furloughed from reserve duty. And he came out of his hummus restaurant and he shot the Palestinian Authority officer who had opened fire with his U.S.-provided M16 at innocent Israeli civilians and murdered 2 of them. Okay? That's what we're dealing with. So Major Ben David was a hero. Not only was he serving in reserves for 150 days, but he was a teacher, and he was a volunteer ambulance driver for the past 15 years. He was the first person to arrive at the scene last year at another murderous terrorist attack at the same gas station outside of Ely, where 4 people were killed. And so this is a man who all he did was give. And he was the graduate of the Bnei David pre-military academy and yeshiva. And 18 of the graduates of that pre-military leadership training and yeshiva institute have been killed in Gaza since October 7th, since the beginning of the ground operation at the beginning of November. So they have lost 18 of their sons. And the thing that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden don't realize is what they mean when they say they want to speak to the people of Israel, or that there's a distinction between the people of Israel and the government of Israel, because there is a distinction, obviously. But if you wanted to make the distinction, I think the distinction would be that the Israeli public is far more unmoved by American pressure than our leadership is. That the Israeli public couldn't care less what Joe Biden wants. They understand what we need. When you look, by the way, at the casualties, the people who have been killed, the soldiers who have been killed fighting this war, they've overwhelmingly come from the sectors of Israeli society that the U.S. administration, that the Biden administration never thinks about or doesn't think is an important part of Israel, that it's not the real Israel. The real Israel, that is the only Israelis that they're willing to countenance and talk to, are Israeli leftists. But the majority of Israelis are not on the left. They don't live in Tel Aviv. And they, in increasing numbers, are sending their sons and daughters into battle to fight for this country. And we're talking about the national religious, especially the ones who live in Judea and Samaria. We're talking about people from working class neighborhoods in the big cities and from what are called development towns in the periphery of Israel. We're talking about new olim, new immigrants from the United States, from France, from the former Soviet Union. We're talking about all of these sectors of Israeli society that the Biden administration thinks of, I guess, as Israel's incorrigibles or whatever, that we're not the ones who should be counted. And yet we're the overwhelming majority of Israelis. And moreover, the Israeli public, again, is less moved by U.S. pressure than the government is. And they are sending their sons into battle and their daughters into battle because we realize that the objectives that the government has set for fighting this war are the minimal objectives. You know, that this is the least that we need in order to win. And certainly there can be no compromises made on any of those 3 goals of the war: to eradicate Hamas as a military and political organization, to rescue all of our hostages and bring them home, and to prevent Gaza from ever serving as a threat to Israel's national security in the future, which means perpetual Israeli security control at a minimum of Gaza, which means a physical Israeli presence in Gaza, which means that parts of Gaza are going to be taken and annexed into Israel as buffer zones to prevent the people of Gaza from ever waging the kind of massacre that Israel incurred on October 7th, 2023, ever again. And so when Kamala Harris and Joe Biden talk about overthrowing the government, talk to former Israeli ambassadors to the United States, and try to confer with them on how to overthrow the Israeli government, well, you can't. Because the Israeli government is a democratically elected government. And one of the weird things is that you're wanting to do all of these things for Hamas that hates the United States, that despises the American people, that sees itself as part of an Iranian nexus, whose goal is not only to annihilate the Jewish people, but to destroy the United States of America. And so when you're supporting the survival of Hamas and the effective victory of Hamas over Israel because you want it to survive this war, what you're saying is that you are supporting an actor that is a proxy of Iran, whose goal since the inception of the Islamic regime at the end of the revolution in 1979 has been to destroy the United States. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that you're helping the Palestinians. And by the way, why do you want to help the Palestinians? The Palestinian Authority, I'm going to have a whole show on this later this week. The Palestinian Authority is a terrorist organization. And just today, Khaled Abu Tuameh reported that a senior Palestinian Authority official, I don't remember who, said that absolutely the Palestinian Authority, the revitalized Palestinian Authority that the Biden administration so wants to build, will be a unity government between Fatah, the governing party or whatever you want to call it, and the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. So the United States is literally gunning for the establishment of a Palestinian terrorist state run by two terrorist organizations in a national unity government, Fatah, the Fatah terrorist organization, and the Hamas terrorist organization. That's the American goal right now under the Biden administration. To that end, the first thing they want to do that we talked about is they want to overthrow the Israeli government. They want to block us from taking over Rafah. And so reaching the final point in Gaza that Hamas continues to control and seizing the control over the international border with Egypt to prevent Hamas from bringing in the stuff that they need in order to rebuild. But that's not all. Because say Israel takes over Rafah and we block the land border from entrance of ordnance or whatever from Egypt. Well, Biden has another plan to allow it in. What is it? Let's go to the State of the Union address. What does Biden say there? Let's go to the tape, and then we'll talk about it.
Tonight, I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. No U.S. boots will be on the ground. A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day.
So what President Biden is saying here is that he wants to set up a port, a temporary port. But as we know, in government, there's nothing more permanent than something temporary, right? So Biden wants to set up a port inside of Gaza. And they're saying how they're going to do it with landing gear, kind of along the lines of the Normandy beaching, that they are able to set up sort of a pier that goes out for about half a kilometer, just 500 meters, into the waters that's sufficiently deep to allow a cargo ship to dock, okay? So on my way into Jerusalem today, when I was preparing this, I heard a senior official who was in charge of Israel's ports in the past explaining how absurd this is. Right? The United States says they want a port. This is what Biden said just now, right? To bring in humanitarian aid. Are you going to allow anybody to leave through those cargo ships? Of course not, right? We'll get to that in a second. But they're talking about starting with 30 cargo ships anchoring a day and bringing in supplies to Gaza, okay? Who's going to check that? Who's going to inspect 30 ships a day of cargo? Where is it going to be done? How is it going to be done? He said that at Israel's ports in Haifa and Ashdod, in Eilat, about 1.5% of the cargo is inspected. So that they just do a sample. I mean, if you come into the Ben Gurion airport or any other airport, you go through the green customs line, and they pull out, what he's saying is they pull out 1 out of every 100, more or less, people who go through the customs lines for random checks, or if somebody is particularly suspicious, then they know that they have to take them out as well. But here, everything, literally, every single shipment, trucks, ships, obviously, has to be inspected down to the last car. There's no way for you to allow random inspections when you're bringing in cargo that's destined for an area where you're in the middle of a war against a genocidal terrorist organization that still controls a lot of the regime thanks to this fake humanitarian aid that the United States has been pushing onto Israel since the outset of the war. Because the question about the aid is a distribution, and what we see over and over and over again since the United States started placing enormous pressure on Israel to allow in massive quantities of food and water and fuel and medicine and anything else that they can think of, right, into Gaza, is that Hamas has been taking over anywhere between 60 and 70% of the shipments. And then they sell it in black markets at markup prices after they've taken what they need in order to maintain their war effort against Israel. So by insisting on this humanitarian aid, we've been through this many times. I know, don't get too bored, but it's important to underline this. The humanitarian aid, so-called, that the United States is bringing in is enabling Hamas to survive this war. It's enabling Hamas to survive this war. Yesterday I saw a clip. I don't know if I can find it. If I can, we'll put it in here. If not, I'll just describe it to you. Here's a young man in Gaza describing how he's not getting the food that they like, that the food doesn't have the right spices the United States is bringing in. You know who's not complaining about the taste of the food? The hostages who are being starved to death, right? 134 hostages. And the craziest thing about the humanitarian aid mission that the United States is so hell-bent on bringing in by hook or by crook, and it doesn't matter, or in fact, it is geared towards enabling Hamas to survive, is that nobody is talking about the hostages. Nobody is noticing that the only true humanitarian crisis in Gaza is the fact that Hamas is holding 134 Israelis. They won't even tell us if they're alive or how many of them are alive. And we know from the ones who were let out in the previous hostages for terrorist swap that they were being starved to death. So, including the children and the babies. So what do we think that the condition of our hostages is if they're still alive, if any of them are still alive? And yet here we have the Biden administration saying that the humanitarian crisis is not Israel's hostages. It's the Hamas terrorists who are holding them. That those are the ones that the United States has to help, and they want to build a port where you're not going to be able to inspect the cargo coming in. So you're basically ensuring not only that Hamas is, made happy and fat and able to continue to fight forever, but also that they can be resupplied militarily. We've already seen ceramic vests and other things, other military equipment coming in these lorries that have been going into Gaza. Right, in random checks, they found that. So now the United States wants to increase tenfold the amount of supplies that are coming into Gaza. And the other aspect to that I was going to talk about, particularly before I heard the specific issue that there's no way to inspect all of this cargo, so the United States is setting Israel up, right? It's that, there's no place to put a proper port because there's no protective alcove inside of Gaza that you can properly put a port. And the place that you would want to do anything in terms of marine shipments into Gaza is the port in El Arish. But that's the other thing, is that El Arish, which is, 50 kilometers south of Gaza in Egypt, right? That's a place which solves all of the humanitarian problems, including where to house people. There are 1 million Palestinians, or 1.4 million, depending on who you're asking, who have sought refuge in Rafah. And the United States says Israel has to find a place for all of them to be before it can operate inside of Rafah, to take out Hamas's remaining forces there and to seize control of the international border. And the one place that's so obvious that they should go, the one that they don't want to go to, is Egypt. They want to cross the border into Egypt. We've already talked about the fact that third countries have expressed a willingness to accept Palestinian refugees from Gaza. We're talking about Scotland, we're talking about Turkey, we're talking about Canada, we're talking about Chechnya, who has, full neighborhoods that they're building, that they want to bring in 2 million Gazans. They're happy to empty out Gaza so that they can have them all. And they have to repopulate after, I guess, Russia killed all the Chechens in the wars. Whatever the case may be, they want them. But instead of letting the Gazans leave, the United States have actually been placing pressure on third parties not to accept Gazans. And moreover, they've been pressuring the Egyptians not to allow them to come in. So as it happens now, you've had already, they claim falsely, but whatever, there's a Tablet magazine article that's important for everybody to look at that shows that the casualty statistics that Hamas has put out are mathematically impossible. There's no way that their numbers, 30,000, 70% of them women and children, that have allegedly been killed, has any truth to it. Like, there's no possibility that it's true mathematically, and they show it in this Tablet Magazine article, which is important to look at. But, if an equal number of the non-casualties has already left Gaza. How did they leave Gaza? They pay Egyptian border guards bribes of $10,000 a head to get out. So they can't get out. The Egyptians don't have a problem. They just want money. Question, who's going to pay it? Yesterday, it was reported that the Egyptians are saying that it would cost $90 billion to rebuild Gaza, which the United States wants to do. Do American taxpayers want to pay $90 billion to rebuild Gaza, a jihadist outpost that poses an existential threat to America's closest and most reliable ally in the Middle East? I don't think so, right? I don't think so. Not when you're running what is like $30+ trillion annual deficit or whatever in the United States. I mean, that's crazy. You want to give $90 billion to Hamas or to Hamas supporters? I don't think so. Why was Egypt saying this? Not only because it's probably true, but also because they're saying, give us some money. Make us an offer. Egypt's economic situation is a disaster of biblical proportions. I mean, we're talking the plagues here, And here is President Sisi saying, make us an offer. But the Americans won't make an offer because they don't care about Egypt. They care about hurting Israel. They care about aligning the United States with Iran. There are a lot of reasons for that. They actually, the people in the State Department, I heard a colleague of mine, Ron Barat, say it. He put it very nicely. He said, in the past, the State Department officials back in Truman's times, they were opposed to Israel because they thought that Israel was against America's interests, supporting Israel was, or Israel's establishment was, because it was going to get America on the wrong side of the Arabs and their oil and everything. And so they had a reason that was based on, it was wrong, but it was predicated on their understanding of America's national interests. Okay? Here it's different. Here, as Ron said, it's not about America's interests. It's about what's right and wrong. And you have the likes of Hadi Amar and other pro-Hamas, radical, hardcore anti-Israel ideologues who have key positions in the State Department today. And they think that Israel is evil and that Hamas is good. And therefore, the United States has to be on Hamas's side, because if it isn't, if it's on Israel's side, then the United States is evil. So that this isn't about interests at all. It's about good and evil. And it's just that they're so depraved that they think that people who bake babies in ovens and can conduct gang rapes of women and kidnap children and women and men to Gaza, that they're the good guys. They actually believe this. Their whole concept of good and evil is turned on its head, and that's where they're standing today. And so, this is crazy, but this is the U.S. administration. This is where the State Department is. This is where the White House is, and this is the policy that they're pushing. That's why they want a port for Hamas against Israel. That's why they won't let Gazans leave. They don't want an actual humanitarian solution to the problem of Hamas's regime in Gaza, because it's easy. Just cross the border and you have it. But America's blocking that because they think Hamas should win. And they're undercutting Israel at every turn and openly now calling for the overthrow of the Israeli government on behalf of terrorists who also hate the United States. They're holding 6 Americans hostage. And you never hear Biden talk about that anymore. So this is the last part that I wanted to talk about today, which is, I think that the people who should be standing up are the Republicans, are the people who are pro-American in America, because America is advancing the interests of America's enemies who seek the destruction of freedom. But the people who have been the first victims of the rise of these forces inside of American society following October 7th, their empowerment, their emboldenment after October 7th are the American Jews. And America's premier pro-Israel lobby, AIPAC, is having its annual conference this week. And the question is, what are they going to say there? Now, when you see the level to which the malevolence at the heart of Biden's policies vis-a-vis Israel, he'll give us defensive weapons, but he's going to undermine and block our ability to win, right? He wants to overthrow our government. What is AIPAC going to do? We've never been in such an open crisis of relations, even under Obama, because what we see is that the Biden administration is just Obama's third term. It's the same people, same policies. It's just propelled forward 6 or 7 years now. So what is AIPAC going to do? And the answer is, I don't know, because AIPAC, like all these other major liberal American Jewish organizations, most American Jews are liberals or moderates or now progressives. And so you say, what are you going to do? Right? What is AIPAC going to do now? Is AIPAC going to stand up because of pressure or not? Well, traditionally, particularly in years, we've seen that AIPAC, like the Biden administration, has hated Netanyahu, right? And they have really, not been great with Netanyahu. Netanyahu says, don't support Palestinian statehood, and they go out and they support Palestinian statehood. Why? Because that's the Democratic policy. So that's what AIPAC wants. But here you see that, the same administration that seeks to overthrow the Netanyahu government is also enabling the attacks against them. I think it was last week, it was reported that the Department of Education has opened up an investigation, a civil rights investigation of Harvard University. You'd say, oh, great, they're finally going to look into the anti-Semitism. Well, no. They're opening up an investigation of Harvard University against alleged civil rights and infractions against the Palestinian Americans or Palestinians who study at Harvard. So the same people who have been threatening the Jews at Harvard, who have been enabled by an institution which is now institutionally anti-Semitic, right, to continue to terrorize Jewish students on campus. And this is true even more after Claudine Gay was forced out of her position as president, not because she was enabling anti-Semitism, but because she plagiarized her academic papers, whatever. But anti-Semitism is only getting worse. And in order to pretend to be taking care of the anti-Semitism on campus, the Harvard acting president brought in an anti-Zionist Jew to oversee a fake committee to fight anti-Semitism on campus. And this guy hates Israel so much that he said that, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, even though it's literally hitting the students at his own institution and on the heads, right? But whatever. The Department of Education, the United States of America, is now blaming the victims. It's attacking the Jewish students and claiming that they're harming the civil rights of the students who are attacking them. So that's this administration. That's what this administration is doing. They're not opening civil rights or hate crimes investigations against the people who are rioting on the streets of American cities and protesting and demonstrating and frightening Jews at synagogues and at Jewish day schools and Jewish businesses in major cities around the country. They're not opening up civil rights investigations against universities and professors who are terrorizing Jewish students on campuses from coast to coast. They're not doing any of these things. They're enabling them. They're enabling them by not investigating them and instead coming down like a load of bricks against anybody who tries to stand up against these anti-Semitic hate mobs on the streets of America today. So, the hatred of the Israeli right, or really of the Israeli majority, is already bleeding into enabling the supporters of Hamas in the United States to run rampant over the American Jewish community. And this is really a moment of truth for the American Jewish community. You guys want to support Palestinian statehood? The more empowered these people become, if God forbid they were ever to get a state, is going to endanger America's Jews still more. That is, the more the Palestinians are empowered by the U.S. government here in the region in Israel, the more emboldened their supporters on the progressive and Islamist red-green spectrum are going to be in terms of their assaults against Jews in the United States. And the less willing law enforcement in the United States is going to be to protect the rights of Jews. So I'm going to just leave you with that. It'll be very interesting. I'm going to be watching personally very closely to see if AIPAC says anything, useful and helpful. I hope that they do. I fear they won't, because I fear that the Biden administration's scapegoating of the Netanyahu government, as if, as Kamala Harris said, there's some sort of distinction between the people of Israel and the government of Israel, and therefore, you can support the Israeli people who are like American progressives, which is a total lie. That kind of view has already bled into the American discourse in a manner that endangers American Jews. You don't want a Palestinian state. If there's a Palestinian state, the future of the American Jewish community will be very, very, very dire. And so I think, we have to understand that, and we'll have to hope for the best. Again, like I said, the weakest link in the chain of the Jewish people's ability to withstand American pressure and to fight to victory as our government has promised and pledged is the government, not the people of Israel. The vast majority of Israelis are not moved by American pressure. And by the way, if Biden comes to the Knesset, it'll be interesting to see what kind of reception he gets, because Israelis don't like to be insulted, and they certainly don't accept that people should come into our people's house and insult our people. So it's something to think about before he actually makes the move. But whatever the case, those are my thoughts for today, and I'm going to leave you with them. I have a great interview coming up this week with Professor John Spencer from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and then some further thoughts further on in the week. So take care for now, and I'll talk to you soon.